Frank Winston here for the Pacifica Historical Society, host of the weekly show Footprints of Pacifica, where we discover and explore the lure and the lore of lovely Pacifica, its character and its characters. This week's show focuses on a unique landmark of Pacifica and a unique person who brought it to us. And that's the statue, the Good Shepherd statue that you can see off of Highway 1 by the Good Shepherd Church. And the artist and the sculptor who brought it to us is Stella Marcella Pilgrim. She's with us tonight to tell us the concept that began to bring that to us. And we're going to have a roll in first from the production that was done 21 years ago talking about that statue. And it was done by our own editor, Steve Brown, and our director, Bob Twig. At this time, let the audience see the background.
In September of 1978, Father Joseph Sullivan, the pastor of our church, the Church of the Good Shepherd, asked me if I could create a 10-foot statue of Jesus Christ the Good Shepherd. I responded yes. He asked me, would I? I replied, yes. The commitment had been made. By mid-January, I had poured 3 waxes of the bust. And around the 1st of February, I chose one of what I call the attitudes, because I was seeking a particular expression.
He gives us all his love.
By mid-later December, the plaster art of the 4-foot Good Shepherd was on its way to Mexico City for casting.
Smiling down on us from up above, he's giving us all his love. He's smiling down on us from up above, he's giving us all his love.
A mold was made of the clay art, and then plaster was poured in this mold, and it was put together in 6 sections. When I arrived at the foundry, instead of 6 sections, I found myself faced with 19 pieces of wax. Work, work, and more work. May 17th, 1981, a great day. The sun was shining. The Good Shepherd was coming home.
Back in the studio with the Miss Pilgrim, Stella Marcella Pilgrim, who was a member of the community here in Coastside before there was a Pacifica. You began here in 1953 and then lived some of your life in Daly City, but always kept an eye out here in Pacifica, what soon became. Tell me why you were selected had to do with your own background, and let's talk about that. Where did you begin your training for your art talent?
Well, I guess I've always been interested in art since I was a child. Always had crayons or a pencil in my hand. And it just came naturally to me. It was a gift, and that's how I accepted it.
But it's more than just a gift in one expression, because you ended up in a field that I had heard very little about, liturgical art. Can you tell us what that's about?
Yes, and I have to correct myself, and I'm doing it publicly, folks.
Okay.
The liturgy really deals with the Mass and the service. Mm-hmm. I think the more correct word would be religious art.
Okay.
And I'd always felt the grace and the spirit of the Lord internally. Never talked about it. I just felt it as a child. It was just a part of me, and what kept me going.
But you applied yourself in a variety of forms of media until you came to this as well.
Yes.
And where did you study your work of art?
I didn't study any particular subject, if that's what you're referring to.
Either that or the
media.
Academy, a particular academy, but a series of places.
I studied, of course, in high school. That was my major, along with English, and then I studied with Ralph Putzker at San Francisco State. I studied with let's see, I have a list with
Patry?
With Mr. Vaganov, who a Russian painter, and one teacher whom I just really adored was Giacomo Patri, and he's has the famous family. He had two sons who were architects, and still, well, one of them apparently has recently deceased, and I believe one is still alive. I'm not certain.
Okay.
However, I took lessons with Maestro Patri in San Francisco. He owned a beautiful Victorian home, and he turned it into a studio, an academy for teaching art.
When you studied with him, were you tied into doing religious art, or it was just art?
No, it was learning to do work with the figure, and we had nude models with which we worked. And just a little aside, he would sit on a little dais playing flamenco guitar, which I adore, and we'd have to straddle these long benches, and the students were one ahead of the other with an easel in front of them. And as the model changed, the clock would go bing, and we'd have to turn the page and start over again because the model would change the pose. And so it was very quick. But it was a wonderful way to learn.
In those days, you weren't sculpturing, you were drawing,
I was
sketching.
drawing and sketching at the time.
And then others that you studied with, I noticed in your background the name of Beniamino
Buffano, yes.
And he's a legend in San Francisco.
He was a joy to meet and to know, and I was honored to have been as close as even closer than I am to you, and be able to just talk with him. I attended his lectures, two of them. One was, they were both at Toto's restaurant over on Universera Boulevard. And then he and I had opportunities to chat one-on-one, and I enjoyed those moments because they were just so enriching. And he was just such a blessedly beautiful person.
Now, at the time that you were studying again, it wasn't focused on religious art necessarily. No,
not necessarily. I love animals. I've drawn animals forever. Scenery. I just the world was my palette. You know, that was where I lived.
What brought you to sculpture as from some of the other forms that you were?
Well, let's see. The first I worked. I worked with granite, and stopped when I hit my knuckles with the mallet, and I gave that up. But I was able to accomplish at least one piece. I I worked with a couple of pieces, and I was able to get those done. But I also worked, of course, in ceramic, and I paint and draw. Excuse me.
And now onto the project itself that we're so focused on, the, please have it, from the statue of the Good Shepherd. How did that come about? You mentioned in the earlier that you were commissioned to do it. You were asked by the priest
Yes.
to do it. How did you come up with the idea, or were your mentors in that, if at all?
I had done a piece of Saint Joseph, San Giuseppe il Bambino, Saint Joseph and the Christ Child.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just after the infant is born, and Joseph is holding the infant close to his breast, and he's just so happy and just gloriously thrilled with this infant, ready to hold him on high. And I did it, and I worked on it in plastilina, and then it was suggested that I take it and have it cast, which I did. And so I got into the foundry and learned about foundry work. And that was my first piece. That was my first religious art piece. And I had used it to do Giulia Mazzetti. This is going back a bit, but Giulia Mazzetti had asked me to paint murals on her window. She had these huge windows, and still does, but now they're sections. But at one time they were solid pieces of glass. And so I was able to do a mural, and I did one of Mary and Joseph and the little boy Jesus happily walking towards church. And I used the corner brick stone that was there on the building as the entrance to the church. And Julia loved it so much, she kept it there long after Easter, long after Christmas, Mother's Day, Father's Day, you name it, until finally the paint began to crack, and she said I had to leave. But I had Saint Joseph on the counter because I wanted to use him as a model when I was painting, doing the drawing on the window. And so I had this bronze piece, and my pastor I can only assume my pastor saw it.
And then
I have no guarantee, nothing other than to guess that he saw it.
But there was a priest also involved in your background that had a great influence on you. Wolchek. Wolchek?
Oh, that he's the reason I did the piece.
And could you
Yes,
share with us
yes.
about that fascinating man,
Yes.
both his
Well, the Good
trials.
Shepherd, you're talking now about the Good Shepherd.
Right.
All right. My pastor, Father Joe Sullivan, I can assume saw the piece. I can only guess. But he knew that I was an artist and a sculptor. How, I don't know, but he knew. And he had called my husband and asked him to do something for the church, and my husband asked me to come along, which I did. And Father Joe, after he and Bob were through talking, Father Joe asked me if I would go to the window with him, and I did. He said, look across the way where the school is. And you see that space there? Yes. Do you think you could do a Good Shepherd statue? And I looked at the space and I said, yes. And he said, would you? And I said, yes. There was no hesitation. There was no hesitation on my part. I knew I could and I would. And I did. Now, what was the reason for the Good Shepherd? And that is Father Adalbert Guschek. And he was a prisoner of in Dachau and Sachsenhausen. And he was there till the day he was digging his grave. And the Americans came and they saved him. And one of the beautiful parts of that story is that Chaplain Powers of Our Lady of Angels in Colma was chaplain. And he saw Father Guschek, and he was responsible for getting Father Guschek here to the United States after many years that Father Guschek had to go through in order to gain access to the United States.
Now, when he came to the United States, did you end up teamed up with him in some manner
oh yes,
too?
through the church. And I got to know him very well, and I just fell in love with the man. You couldn't help but love this person. He was a very saintly man, 19th century thinking. He didn't accept Vatican II. And so I accepted that. I accepted him for who and what he was, and he was just beautiful.
So the concept of how it should be shaped came from him and yourself, or
No.
strictly from you as the artist?
Just me.
Sculptor.
I was asked to do an original concept of the Good Shepherd. And so I kept to that, which was an original concept of the Good Shepherd. And so that is what I had in my mind.
Now the creation of it after the concept, did it have to be reviewed, or it's something that they commissioned you and whatever you were going to come up with?
They asked me before I even started, I had to meet with the parish council and bring some of my pieces, and this is one of the pieces I brought.
This
is
whimsical.
Sir Whimsy of Dalfridge. He's
Sir
a dolphin
Whimsy?
and of Dalfridge. He's a dolphin and a partridge.
And you had created this. Now this has a unique way of expressing itself with
he's
a wind chime. Could you show that for our
He's
people?
a wind chime, and his music differs according to how I create the depth of the wings. The thicker, the different sounds, and so on.
And
He
this,
just sings all over the place.
now was this created in conjunction with your planning for the?
No.
This is just one
This
of the
was
things
one
that
of
you
the
do.
things I did. One of the things I love to do, whimsy. And so I had to bring some pieces to show that I actually
Had the
did work, and I
qualifications,
had the qualifications. So I brought this, and I brought St. Joseph, and I brought another piece, which I forget. I brought others that were not religious pieces. And I had to give them a background of my history, my education. And then I also had to, later, I had to meet with them again and tell them what my concept would be. And so I envisioned the Good Shepherd as walking forward, meeting us halfway, walking forward, meeting us halfway. And his arm length is the full length of his 12-foot body. And I did it that way purposefully because he can grasp the people. He pulls us in,
draw them in.
draw the people in.
Great.
And so I wanted this concept to come through. And so that was what I did. I had to tell them what I had in mind. That and
you had to tell them and illustrate
and
it
I
as
also
well.
had to do a drawing. I had to do a drawing, and I submitted the drawing as well.
And then you created from that a model.
And that, yes, I did.
And
I had, when it was completed, I had to show the model, but the model was rather interesting to do as well.
Look at the video.
there is a video.
Now that is the
showing-
12-foot. That is the 12-foot piece. I did a 4-foot maquette, and the 4-foot maquette was done at my studio at home.
That was before you did the large one,
yes,
to
yes.
just show what it would look like.
Yes, and
Yeah.
I had to bring the completed bronze of the 4-foot to the church where everyone could see.
So you had to consider not only the model, but also how you would be able to translate that to the larger size
Yes,
that you were going to
exactly,
be working with.
exactly.
Yeah, and that was done. What was your studio that you worked with?
I worked in
In your home?
in the back. I have it's really a shack, but it's my studio, and that's where I worked, and that's where I created that 4-foot bronze. Not the bronze, but the piece.
You go under the name of StellaPilgrim, and there's
Yes.
a story behind why you use that name. If you could share that,
Of course.
please.
I'm the only child of my father and mother. My father died at the age of 23 as the result of an accident. A truck rammed into his car, and he was a paraplegic for a year and died of pneumonia at the age of 23. I was 18 and a half months old, so I never really knew him. But when I began the project of the Good Shepherd, my husband thought it would be a good way of honoring my father. by inserting the name Marcella.
And you have on all your artwork
So
since
all my
that time.
artwork is now signed Stella Marcella Pilgrim, although I have early pieces prior to the Good Shepherd that are signed Stella, Aletz, or that's Stella backwards, or just Stella, or Stella Pilgrim.
Well, Stella, when you went down to Mexico and you worked at the foundry, so you bring the concept and the model and then work from the model there?
No, I did which piece are you talking about, the 12-foot or the...
Yeah, the 12.
Okay. I did the 12-foot in a warehouse in San Francisco because of the height of the piece. And I had to climb up on the scaffold and work. As you saw in the opening, I had to be up on a scaffold, and I would, every morning I would call the pastor and say, I'm getting ready to climb the scaffold. And he would say, all right, Stella, remember your act of contrition on your way down. So it was a little joke that he told every morning. That was to kind of relax me before I did the climb.
Well, then, when it was finished in the warehouse, then the next step was to transport it to its ultimate destination.
Yes, it went in sections. We had to, when it was in plaster, we'd go in different mediums. The wood and the wood and a sheet wrapped around it, and then it's burlap, and then wax that, and then a mold is made out of then plaster. I mean, I'm getting them mixed up. I think I'm getting some background noise. But after that, then we put clay, wrap it in clay, and put all of the detail that's going to go on in the clay, and the clay covers all that's under it. And from then, a mold is made from the clay, and it's made in plaster. And then from the plaster, we break that down in sections, and those sections are what went to the foundry
to be
cast in wax.
Okay.
And so when I went to work on the piece, I had all these sections to work on.
I'm in awe of all the work and how you have to do it, climbing the sculpture and the scaffold and the like. Any assistance, or it's just on your own?
I had one person help me with the enlargement, and there are people who specialize in this, and so I had this one person help me with that, but the rest I did on my own.
Now, when it was finished...
I did not cast it. I
You
don't
did
know.
not.
No, I did not. That's the foundry work.
But it came back from the foundry and then was to go into its present site. There's no other stopping off point.
There was one place we set it in a locale that had been ordained as the place we would set it, so that until we could get a truck that would take the piece to the church
It
property.
was that large, so you need a...
Yes, a sheety drayage, actually.
Oh,
they loaned us the use of their
people.
they loaned us the use of their drayage truck to their flatbed.
Now, then it was placed as we saw in the video, and there's one other step, however, and that was you had to raise funds for this.
Oh, yes.
And tell us how that came about.
All right, that is, well, first I don't want to leave out the importance that Father Gushek played in this.
Please. Oh, by the way, we have a photo of Father Gushek.
The Good Shepherd stands because of this man here, this priest, Father Gushek, Adalbert Gushek. It was his desire to have the Good Shepherd, and the reason was that when he